Because progressivism at its heart is trying to make everyday people's lives better and making the system more egalitarian. Focus on that. Because the outrage engine, again, does not help. It can drive likes, but likes aren't the same as votes.
This is the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. My name is Rob Farley. Today we have with us someone who has become a very common guest on the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast, Ms. Erin Petrie, who is a longtime friend, a graduate of the Patterson School, a friend of the blog, a friend of the pod, and has recently run for the representative for the 6th District in Kentucky. That race was not successful, or at least was not successful in terms of a victory, but I think it was successful in a lot of other ways. And today we are going to talk about all of the aspects of what it really means to run for office, especially for a federal office in sort of the modern electoral context. So, Erin, how are you doing today?
I'm living the dream, even though I am a little noodly after the workout I did this morning.
Yes. Erin and I shared an Orange Theory workout this morning, which was brutal.
It was rough.
I only got 6 splat points, but I'm still like completely useless. So it was pretty rough. So what are you drinking right now, Erin?
So I have a really, really exciting beverage. It's called black coffee.
Black coffee, but viewers, listeners, I want to tell you that the black coffee is in a Maker's Mark mug.
Yes, it's my favorite cup. And it says, character isn't made by machine.
Well, see, there we go. And so keeping it Kentucky and keeping it bourbon. So I myself am drinking this was from Red's in Nashville, which is one of the really terrible bars right downtown in Nashville. This little jar here. And what I'm drinking is zero sugar orange crush and vodka. Which is everybody's great vision of what to do on a Monday afternoon. So, Erin, I'm thinking about this in terms of, sort of basically 3 ways of thinking about the experience that you had, right? Mm-hmm. And so I want to divide things into I want at least sort of conceptually to be thinking about things in terms of these categories. Like category 1 is going to be stuff that, oh yeah, I expected that, right? And that was pretty much what I expected. Category 2 is going to be, I expected something like that, but it was a lot different. And category 3 is going to be, whoa, that was really different than what I expected. So I guess to start out with, I guess I will let you just sort of say, like, what are your initial thoughts, your initial reactions? It's been a little while since the primary has ended, right?
Yes.
And so you've had some time to cogitate and think about it. So, what are the first things you think of when people ask you, how was the primary?
I mean, it was, here's one of the things, and I had a conference. So I just got back from Washington, D.C. I was in D.C. for 4 days for some meetings, then also to see some friends. And one of the things that I had a conversation with one of my very close old friends with was, we had always understood politics, right? We were policy nerds. We were well informed about elections, but we'd never really done politics, right? And so the experience of actually doing politics, being in the muck and right in the fight itself is very different than you might imagine. There is, I think that there's certainly a romanticization of elections, right, from TV and, movies and whatnot, and even social media, I think, to some degree. But there's also just so much there is a lot of drama. There's a lot of interpersonal drama, but there's also just an endless amount of things that are just benign and quotidian. It's a lot of cookouts, it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of paperwork. So it's not necessarily as sexy as you would think. But overall, if people say, what was your experience with the primary? I would say it was a fascinating learning experience. I learned a lot about myself, about where I'm from, about people in general, about our electoral system, but I am beyond glad that I did it. And I listen, it's like it's like that Elle Woods quote from Legally Blonde, when they're talking about going to Harvard, and she's like, "What? Like it's hard."
Hmm.
So it's like, people said, "Well, why didn't you do school board? Why didn't you do city council first?" And I'm like, I really wanted to do federal office,
Hmm.
and so I say, "What? Like it's hard?
Hmm.
It's hard, but it's
So,
it's
so I
doable."
so I want to pause you at this point, right? When we say it's hard, and can we go a little bit more into that? Because I think that there are still people in the United States, right? As people who like don't understand politics as a vocation, right? To borrow a phrase from Weber, right? But who don't understand politics as a vocation, who don't get how much work it is, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so, could you go through maybe a little? I don't know if we need to go through like a day on the campaign, but could you speak a little bit about, especially maybe some of the unexpected stuff about like how much work this actually was?
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny because at first my mother was very annoyed with me throughout this process because she's like, "Well, you can't do anything. You can't hang out. You can't do anything with me. Like you can't help me with things." But then, when I would hear her talk to her friends or other people, I mean, she would be very upfront and say she works her ass off. She works like 22 hours a day. I would wake up, check my emails, check my texts, check the news, because as a candidate, you're also expected to know more about what is generally going on than you would normally be. And this is about everything, right? I mean, from education policy to defense to things that are happening locally. And then a lot of it's fundraising. So much of it's fundraising. It's dialing for dollars. It's calling people. It's trying to figure out how you can get more money. And then I mean, so when it comes down to it, a political campaign is three things: it's money, message, and field. You need money to get your message out to the field to then deploy voters to the polls. And so it's constant, right? You can't let your guard down once, because if you do not say something about an event that was important, your silence is noticed, and the first mover is noticed. So you always want to be the first mover on a statement. You always want to try to beat the field to the punch. And then, it's every afternoon, every evening is events on events on events. A lot of it was driving in my car. A lot of it was eating Taco Bell or eating snacks that were not super healthy, just to get to event to event. I went to church more than I've ever gone to church in my life. I went to more funerals than I've ever gone to in my life.
Did
And
you go to synagogue? Did you happen to visit one of the synagogues?
no, I actually reached out to both of them and they kind of ghosted me. So
Oh, really?
I tried.
Yeah. Well, I think that they were there was concerns about them being politicized. Um, so I guess to build upon that, right? It seems like a lot of the stuff you talk. So one of the places where I think that your campaign was sort of justly renowned, at least in the bluegrass, right, and talked about a lot, was in terms of, Mary, are you drinking a White Claw? No, it's a Alani. Okay. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. I was like, uh-oh.
Mm. Anyway, so one of the spaces where I think your campaign was justly renowned and was copied in many ways was your social media approach, right? Which was extremely energetic, extremely aggressive. I think that like I sort of, the clinching moment for me was when Andy Barr, of all people, was drinking bourbon, right, and was talking in his own race about how being from the bluegrass and being in favor of the bourbon industry and so forth was sort of key to his identity. I don't remember anybody doing that before you sort of repeatedly appeared on your social medias, on sort of across the way, talking about your relationship with bourbon, which is something that, of
Yeah,
course, you've done professionally, right? But you really leveraged for the campaign. So, in
yeah.
general terms, like, walk me through how you approached social media, how much of it was planned, how much of it was improvised, and so how you created the presence that you created, which, by the way, continues, right? You haven't given up on this. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing, so I'm going to kind of preempt part of that and say that it was very important to me, regardless of what really happened in the race, for me to not just disappear. There were people on the campaign trail who would say, Erin, whatever happens, please don't disappear. And then sometimes they would cite certain candidates who've done that in the past. And sometimes they would just say, just please don't disappear. Because the thing is that you are building this brand, you are building this presence, you are building this momentum. And then all of a sudden, there's a clear stopping point, right? There's a deadline and you either pass go or you don't, right? And for me, it was incredibly important for me to take that momentum and continue it forward. And when it comes to my social media, 99% of it was all improvised. I'm known for my direct to camera, low edits, um, low special effects, very forthright, candid conversation style. But I also am someone who prides myself in being very educational when it comes to social media, because I don't want to just get on there and be one of these, just someone who, just complains and tries to, rile people up, because listen, we're all mad, right? But I want people to find a way to take their anger, take their frustration, and put it into something that's productive. And so for me, I did most of that as I would have a thought and then I would literally sit down. Sometimes I would have a few takes, but most of what you've seen are the first take and they are uncut of what I had. Because I also wanted people to understand who I am and how I would be as an elected leader if I was elected, right? I'm like, this is how I respond. This is how I am as a person. I didn't want to be overly edited, overly filtered, overly consulted. And so the majority of it was unplanned. And the only time there was something that was like, quote unquote, planned is if, I was like, oh, well, there's this day. I guess I got to do that. I've got to, maybe I would record it the day before, 2 days before, just because I, remembered then and didn't want to forget. But the majority of it was kind of, yeah, it was all improvised. Mhm.
So you must have gotten feedback, and I know you got feedback both from sort of listeners, but from other candidates along the way, right? So did that indicate to you that, hey, we're doing something right here? Did that indicate you hear some minor course corrections we need to do? Sort of what role did feedback from comments and from people you met, while canvassing and other stuff? How did that affect your social media strategy?
So, I mean, from canvassing and from talking to people, that was a lot of inspiration for
Hmm.
my videos, right? Because it would be like, I just talked to somebody and they told me this, and here's my thoughts on this. Or someone just, mentioned this to me, or I just saw this, or someone said this in a speech. And it was funny because people would come to me and say, oh, Erin, this other candidate who you're running against is now doing videos in your style, kind of the walk and talk, the sort of direct to cam. Everybody knows the inside of my car at this point, because I do a lot of videos where I make sure my steering wheel is straight. I set my phone right on it and I do it right there, whether I just came out of the gym, whether I look nice, whether I don't look nice. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't look overly polished all the time, because I wanted people to know that I'm a real person, and that, people who are in elected office should be seen as real people, and relatable, not like some sort of ethereal other class that exists, right? And I want to change that narrative. And so the overwhelming majority of the feedback on my social media presence was really positive. Now, of course,
Hmm.
you're always going to have haters in the comments over everything. I got a comment literally yesterday. I posted something when I was in DC and it was insanely bright. It's middle of summer, right? And I had my sunglasses on and I was doing a walk and talk. And someone said, you need to not put sunglasses on because people don't trust people with sunglasses. And I was like, I'm a person. I wear sunglasses when it's outside and it's sunny. Like it's
That's really weird because sunglasses are cool, right? I mean, all I can think of is like
and I have
Obama wearing
Ray
sunglasses. It's
Ban.
like, yeah, that's cool, right? So,
Yeah, I was like, it's very funny, it's, you can't let the comments, you can't look at all the comments. And,
mhm.
for a while I tried to reply to a lot of the comment. I didn't try to, I mean, obviously the bot and the troll comments, I don't like to do, defensive, but if people ask me legitimate questions, I would try to engage with that. And I still try to do that, but I try to kind of protect my peace a little bit more. And I
Mhm.
got much more liberal with the block button, when people people just became perennial haters and trolls because it was not, I mean, yeah, sure, I guess I could keep them because it gives me more, exposure on the algo, but I was like, I'm tired of this, so bye.
Right. No, no, no. I mean, and I think that that's like sort of another part of this, right? Is that like sort of being active and available while at the same time sort of maintaining your status, your sanity and your ability to control your personal space is really, really important.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the thing is, you're not going to please everyone. And, there are people I said something about Taylor Swift's wedding on Threads because Threads was a great resource for me and I'm still very much on it. And I love Threads. It's kind of, become the Twitter that doesn't suck now because I've deleted Twitter off my phone for right now because I literally was getting no benefit from it
Mhm.
whatsoever. And so, I said something about, I'm really proud of your, like, I wish Taylor Swift nothing but the best because she's a great role model. Like she's built a huge empire a lot on her own. Of course, she's gotten some help, but really, I mean, what she's been able to do is amazing. And she's been able to build a really positive, strong following. And I wish her nothing but the best. And someone was like, no one should ever be, you know, propping up billionaires. And I was like, I'm just wishing a fellow girl a happy life. Like, and they were like, this is
Well,
the only time I've ever disagreed with you. And I was like, listen, if you think that we're going to agree on 1,000% of things, then I don't know what to tell you because you absolutely should not agree 100% of the time with anybody on anything.
right. No, and interestingly, and this is a digression, right? But interesting, following sort of especially how right-wing media covers
Hmm.
Taylor Swift. I remember just sort of a really good thread where somebody was giving for, which was sort of on the right, a little bit of an apostate account. It's like this is actually how someone lives the good life, right, in the United States now. That Taylor Swift is living the good life, right? She is
Yeah,
engaging in, she is a successful businesswoman. She has operated effectively within the space. She is a serial monogamist, but she finally finds the person that she likes, and he has a job, you know.
yeah, he has a real job. He has his own brand. He exists outside
Right. Right. No,
of
she finds
her.
a successful man, and it's a successful partnership that produces what everyone hopes will be a successful marriage in the classic conservative way, right?
Absolutely.
And so it was very interesting, but that's a bit of a digression. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that you brought up Threads, right? Because of course there's this huge debate, largely driven, I think, by sort of really insecure people on Blue Sky, about sort of this
I hate Blue
X,
Sky.
the former, hold off, the X, former Twitter, the Blue Sky, and the Threads, right now. And so for you, Threads was the most useful. The other two weren't. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like why and how that
Yeah.
worked out?
Yeah, so Threads was really interesting. I didn't even really realize what it was. I kind of just started poking around on it, and now
Mhm.
I have a really strong following. And people still stop me in public and say, "Aaron, I follow you on Threads." Like that's how I learned about you. People, and I also did the same with TikTok, right? And I cross post across all my platforms. And so it was important to me to show up on Facebook, Instagram, um, Threads, TikTok. I mean, I'm technically on Blue Sky, but we can again, talk about that in a second because I think there's no efficacy there because it's just an echo chamber,
Mhm.
um, and you're not really reaching new people. And so, but I wanted to meet people where they were, right? And so Facebook is still the largest social media platform on the planet. So that was something that was important for me to keep up. But I also leverage things like LinkedIn for my,
Mhm.
professional network because I have almost 7,000 followers on LinkedIn. And then I also did a Substack too, right? And there are
Mhm.
people, I had someone literally this weekend say, I loved how you did Substack because I really thought that was a great way for you to engage more deeply with people. And I followed your Substack throughout the campaign, and I'm thankful that you're continuing it after the campaign. And So again, it's this accessibility, especially at a time when let's look at like Mitch McConnell, right? Or Tom Keene Jr. from New Jersey, who just like disappear for months at a time. And they say, oh, it's a medical thing. And I'm like, well, anybody who knows me from when I was dealing with medical stuff, I was accessible because I was like, I want people to know that I'm not dead. But I guess that doesn't matter anymore for members of elected office, if you're dead or but whatever. But for me, it was very
We
important.
will. I want to return to that, but I'm going to so let us return to that at the end of the
Yeah.
podcast.
But
So,
to me, it was very important for me to come off as accessible because the last thing I want to do is to have a reputation as someone who is unreachable and someone who, once again, going back to my sort of initial premise, was I didn't want to be seen as not a normal person and as someone who exists in like a class separate from everybody else.
right, right,
But I like Threads because it was conversational, and then I can also like engage in some pop culture stuff on there too, just to to
right.
for my own sanity.
And did you so just to pause briefly on Blue Sky, did you just not get any traction there? Did you have a negative experience, or was it just useless, or was it sort of actively bad?
I think it was useless in the sense that most of the people who followed me on Blue Sky followed me everywhere, anyways. I
Mm,
wasn't reaching new people. And I feel like the people who are on Blue Sky also follow me on Threads. And on Blue Sky, I feel like this is like progressive politics, right?
mhm.
And so people who are into progressive politics kind of already know who the progressives are, and they will find me on other social medias as well. And so there was nothing that I ever had I couldn't even figure out how people did anything on Blue Sky. It doesn't make sense. It's not intuitive. There's no real algorithm that I can understand. And it seemed more outrage driven than anything. Like I needed to be part of the Trump MAGA outrage machine to really get traction on Blue Sky. And frankly, I think that that's unproductive because, yeah, Trump sucks. MAGA is a horrendous white national fascist organization or movement, right? I mean, we all know that. I don't need to fuel the outrage machine because I am doing this to actually change things for the better.
And just sort of one more follow up on that with respect to X, right? I mean, it's just so your experience was just it's a right wing echo chamber at this point, right? Sort of the
Yeah.
reverse of Blue Sky.
So I was on Twitter since 2008, right?
Hmm.
And so on my personal Twitter, like I have all my bourbon people on there, like DC people. Like I did when I was in DC, the things that I really loved about Twitter in there because I was really able to curate my following,
Hmm.
and it was like bourbon, local restaurant scene, and DC local politics. Then I created a new account for my campaign, and it was just, that was again, it's like protecting my peace because I would open up Twitter and it was just Elon Musk, Kyle Rittenhouse, all of these incels, Andrew Tate, like all of these ridiculous people. And I'm like, I don't need to see this side of the internet and I don't want to hear. The only thing, I swear to you, the only thing that Twitter was good for me was interacting with some of the Republicans in my race through
Hmm.
DMs. That's it.
So that's very interesting, and I want to come back to that. But so right now, let's shift from the social media, which is of course very abstract and is very sort of broadcasty, right? Even though it has this interactive aspect to it. So you got a lot of experience in this race dealing with the local Democratic parties, right? And so just to give a little bit of foundation to this, right? Obviously, KY6, the core of KY6 is Fayette County, which has Lexington, right, which is the second largest city in Kentucky, a major electoral prize. But KY6 also has a number of surrounding counties, which are much smaller, which and this is, I think, relevant, which 20 years ago were heavily Democratic, and those counties are no longer heavily Democratic. In fact, they've switched almost completely, right? And that has some institutional aspects in the sense that, you're dealing with a lot of people who used to be in the majority and who aren't in the majority anymore. So could you talk a little bit about, sort of what it was like dealing with sort of local Democratic parties in all of these little communities and counties that constitute KY6? Because I think this is part of the job that sort of people who haven't run for office don't understand, right? Is that you have to go to these dinners, you have to go to these events, and you have to meet these people, glad hand these people, so forth.
Yes. I will tell you is that the experience is wildly different depending on the county. Some counties, I had the experience where when I reached out to them when I got in, they weren't even formed yet. They had to like reform themselves. And some of those counties, like Garrard County, is like, they're doing amazingly. Same thing with Mercer County. They have reformed and they are doing great things. I was just down there 2 weeks ago with my state senator, Reggie Thomas, and we were talking about how they can, push things forward and, continue to grow. And like 25 people showed up. And for Garrett County is a small rural county and it's incredibly red. And the fact that there were that many people who showed up on a Monday night for that was like, I mean, it was really heartening, right? There were some counties that were harder to get in touch with than others. But then I kind of cracked that. And then, of course, remember, these are volunteer positions, right? None of these people are getting paid. And so people have to either really care about it or they have to have like some sort of incentive to do it. So some counties are more responsive than others. Some counties have pre-existing loyalties to certain candidates, which was a frustration for a lot of us. But I will tell you, like overall, I mean, I loved engaging with the county parties. The state party, I had barely any interaction with at all. But I mean, yeah, these county parties were for the most part really great. Um, but you have to show up because these are the most engaged Democratic voters. And these are also the people who other Democrats in those communities come to for advice saying, hey, who am I supposed to vote for? Like, what should I be doing? Right. I'm frustrated. Like, these are the Democratic thought leaders in those particular counties. A lot of them had candidate forums, and I showed up to all of them. There was like one time I couldn't go to like two things, right? And then I would send my staffer as my surrogate. But I mean, these are people who still reach out to
That's
me.
John, by the way. We should have a shout out for John, right?
Okay, John David Hurley, he was my number one guy. He went everywhere with me. He was my photographer. He was my deputy finance manager. He was my advance guy. And I'm really proud because he's now working on the coordinated campaign down in North Carolina. And he's from Rockcastle County, lives in Wilmore now. Well, now he's in North Carolina for a little bit, but I mean, truly, I mean, he's become one of my closest personal friends now, but he's just a good guy, my consigliere in many ways. And John David Hurley, we love you.
Oh, he's a huge fan of Widow's Bay too, and he texts me every time that he watches a new Widow's Bay episode. So,
Yeah, I know all three. Yeah, you and Elise and John David are trying to get me to watch Widow's Bay, and I don't have time to watch
you really should watch Widow's Bay. Anyway, so another characteristic which I found very interesting, and this was while I was canvassing for you, and this may be. I mean, I'm not sure it's uniquely a Kentucky thing, but it sort of speaks to sort of how local politics really are in Kentucky. As I would be canvassing and I would be like, oh yeah, we're voting for Erin. She's kin. And I'm like, oh, well, how? And then it would be like, this very laconic, yeah, we're voting for Erin. She's kin. And then it would be like, three greats of a grandmother and like so many cousins that have you on. Then it's like, because that family relationship, they have to vote for you no matter how they feel about your politics, right? Which feels very Kentucky, but I'm sure it's replicated in other places in the country. So
yeah, no, I love that. And I mean, here's the thing too, right? Is that coming into this, there would be people who would say to me like, I didn't like it would be people who I would just like meet for the first time and I'd be like, oh, hey, I'm Erin Petrie and I talk to them about my stuff. And I'm like, well, I hope I can count on your vote. And they're like, oh, no, I'm voting for Sherilyn because Sherilyn and I have been friends for like 20 years. And I was like, I absolutely respect those personal relationships. Like, I would totally vote for my friend. Like, I mean, that just makes perfect sense, right? I'm not going to argue with that at all, right? Really where you get into the persuasion game is when it's around policies, and sort of your North Star vision, right? But if it's family, if you're close friends, like, why would you even bother arguing with that?
Right, exactly. So I want to come back to the Sherilyn and sort of the other candidates question in a bit,
Yeah.
but you mentioned your relations with the state party. So um, could you elaborate on that a little bit to the extent that there's any elaboration, and also sort of, and I sort of more broadly, what was your interaction during this process with state and national figures, right? Because of course, so many races are nationalized now, and I think that the biggest one that we're all familiar with in sort of really tragic ways is the Maine Senate race, right, which became nationalized in sort of really unfortunate and unproductive ways. But but every race is kind of like that, right? And so, what kind of interaction did you have with state and with national figures as being part of this race, especially as a progressive?
National, none. National as far as like the D Trip, DNC, none.
Mhm.
Um, Now I did engage with people at certain like organizations that did endorsements. I made
Mhm.
a lot of really good relationships with other candidates, especially other progressive candidates running across, across the country.
Mhm.
That was, that's a really, I'm in multiple signal chats that are related to that. So there's that piece. On a state level, I'd be at a lot of events with like Rocky Adkins and Jacqueline Coleman.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes like Morgan Eves, so Jacqueline Coleman is Lieutenant Governor. Rocky Adkins is the senior advisor to Bashir. Both of them are running for governor now.
Mhm.
And then Morgan Eves is the executive director of the Kentucky Democratic Party. I'd see her sometimes. Andy Bashir, really not often
Mhm.
because, kind of he stayed very much out of this race. But I'll tell you, like, I'll be honest, like this was not a sexy national race, right? Like this is not your Tallarico Crockett. It wasn't a special election, right? So it was just kind of part of the broader May 19th primaries. And so for me, I was hyper focused on making sure that I kept it as local as possible.
Mhm.
Now there were some national, like podcasts or like certain things that I engage with, but for the most part, the national exposure was not as much. I think that if I run again, which I will, um, I think that there would be more engagement with like the D Trip, the DNC, maybe some other members of Congress. But remember, I
Mhm.
also came into this very intentionally as wanting to be anti-establishment because the
Right.
establishment is untrustworthy right now, right? And we need to really give the establishment a swift kick in the butt to get things moving. And so, technically the party is supposed to stay neutral in primaries. The reality of that is untrue.
Mhm.
um, and to varying degrees, depending on what state you're in, depending on what county you're in. And this is something that, again, those conversations that I've had with candidates from across the country, especially progressives, has rung true and has been a consistent thread.
Right. So, to shift back to again to something that you already mentioned. So you mentioned, and this was something that was really visible to me, sort of as being around you and near you in the campaign, was that I got to know your competitors, right? So I got to have
Yeah.
conversations with Sherilyn Stevens. I got to have conversations with Zach Dembo, who of course ended up being the nominee. I got to have conversations with other people at Kloiber, other people who were in the race, right? And so it feels like to me that sort of the national and especially the social media mood with
Hmm.
respect to how politics are appropriately conducted, right, is increasingly that politics ought to be conducted in a confrontational setting, right? And this is especially true about inter-party conversations, right, where one should not brook a polite conversation with any Republican for any Democrat you ever expect to be the
God.
nominee, right? But that's the kind of rage, right? And I know, like, you had comments about the late Senator Graham, you've had a number of comments about Senator McConnell, right? But on social media, right, if one were to put forth even even so the most milk toast, I am sorrowed to hear about the passing of Senator Graham, you would be roasted, right?
Oh yeah.
And that's increasingly the case even with intra-party politics, right? Because of the factionalism, right? That you're supposed to not just want to beat your intra-party opponents, you're supposed to want to hate them as much as your followers on social media hate them because you're betraying because you're not hating hard enough. But the reality, of course, is that you had to work with Sherilyn, you had to work with Zach, you had to work with David. You may have even
Yep.
have worked with people on the other sides. Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, I will go ahead and start with the Republican piece, right? Is that so? And also remember, we are in a position, especially in Kentucky, we are in a super majority, right? If you don't know how to work with Republicans and if you are not willing to speak and discuss things with Republicans, you are just going to continue to dig yourself deeper and deeper into your own self-righteous hole.
Mhm.
And you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere at all. I pride myself in, making sure that I do have good relationships with people on both sides of the party because I'm like, if I have good, strong relationships with Republicans, that allows me to actually get things done. And I want Republicans to say nice things about me rather than want to crucify me constantly on social media, right?
Mhm.
And people can say all they want to about my policies, but they can't crucify me personally, right? For my personality, for how I engage with them. And I'll tell you is that I ran into Ryan Dotson when I was in Frankfurt. And Ryan Dotson was one of the Republicans vying for the nomination. He was unsuccessful, but all the Republicans, I would go up to them and I would shake their hands and talk to them and chat with them because there's no reason for me to be nasty. I think a lot of his policies are absolutely disgusting. I mean, he would get up on the stage and be like, well, the only thing, he's like, I was in Frankfurt and I made sure that boys can't use girls' bathrooms. And I was like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. And that's absurd, right? Because trans rights are human rights. And also, I don't care who uses a bathroom. That's not a problem that anybody actually has. But, I ran into him in Frankfurt and he and his wife were there. And his wife was like, oh my gosh, like you were so nice. Like you didn't have to be. Right. And I hear
Right.
this a lot. And I actually hear this from some of the other people on the Dem side too. They're like, Aaron, you didn't have to act in this way. Right. Like Zach Dembo, like said, he was like, Aaron, you didn't have to endorse me. You didn't have to do this. And I was like, well, I actually believe I did, first off, just because I'm like, that's how you play the game. But no, I didn't have to. But
Mhm.
that's the right thing to do, right? Like, I'm not in this just to be, like an edgelord. Like, I'm not in this to just be like, being angry, because being angry doesn't actually solve anything. I'm in this to actually get things done, right? And I can be pissed about things all I want, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I am getting things done in a productive way. Listen, I do have a master's in diplomacy after all. Um, so I understand that you need to work with people who are your enemies as well as people who are your friends. It's that keep your enemies closer. And there's always going to be opportunities because you never know where strange alliances will lie.
Right. So, speaking a little bit about this diplomacy aspect, so you mentioned earlier in the conversation we had, and I know you and I have talked a lot about, I won't call it, I mean, so I would say there is a broader, and I think this is undeniable, there is a broader conspiratorial turn in American politics, right? In thinking about American politics, right? And I am entirely comfortable saying that this is mostly on the GOP side, right? That sort of GOP and especially MAGA politics have become just sort of a snake pit of competing conspiracies, right?
Oh
Where
God,
the
yeah.
sort of it's just sort of the most brutal and the least productive way of thinking about politics, right? Is trying to figure out who they are. And I actually really admired people made fun of this, but Senator Graham had a comment that people posted after that he passed away, where he was elected to Congress and he's trying to figure out who is the they, right? Who's the they who really run
Yeah.
stuff, and he couldn't find them, right? So then he was elected to Senate, and he was like, "Well, surely now I'll know who the they is, right?" And there's still no, they are not around. They do not exist, right? There is no executive committee of the
I
bourgeois.
mean, there's no cabal.
Right, right. There are no elders who make American politics function, right? And sort of that sort of creates this endless tension in American politics. But However much the conspiracism may be largely located in right-wing and MAGA circles, it is also spreading to Democratic circles, right? And so you referred to this, and a lot of people refer to this as blue anon, right? So how did you deal with, people coming at you from the Democratic side who had sort of really outlandish conspiracy theories?
I mean, honestly, the things that I would hear, sometimes I heard some cuckoo bananas things, and I'd just be like, that's really interesting. I'd never thought about that before. And then you literally just don't engage.
Hmm.
It's kind of like if you go home for, like, if your parents are like real MAGA or like real religious or something, and you go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, you just know those red lines not to cross, because it's not
Hmm.
nobody's gonna win. Nobody's going to win. So you just, you listen to them, and then you're like, cool. And then you move on.
Right.
And then you try to steer the conversation to a different thing, or you just say cool and then talk to somebody else. You just have to be diplomatic about it.
Right. I mean, it must be a struggle though, because these are often sort of the most enthusiastic people you're
Yeah.
talking to, right? They're really excited about politics. They're really excited. They seem to have uncovered the conspiracy, and so you must it must be a struggle to like not disappoint them that you are not joining their life world.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting, right? Like one of the guys who is very much involved in like some of the groups I'm in,
Hmm.
like the progressive groups. I was talking about like data centers, and I was like, I love nuclear power. It is carbon neutral from an energy perspective. Yes, there's the waste piece, but we're getting better and better all the time at dealing with nuclear waste. Like Scandinavia is like using it. I mean, nuclear is a great form of energy, and it is a way for us to really solve this energy crisis that is continuing to worsen. And I am someone who is a decarbonization acolyte, right? Like I always want to do things to decarbonize as much industry as possible. And he's like, it was funny. He was like, I still like you even though you love nuclear. He's like, even though I'm wrong on this, right? It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Is like you're never going to agree with somebody 100%. And if you are looking for an elected person or a candidate to be 100% checks all the boxes, you are looking for a unicorn, because we are people, we are nuanced, we are a product of our experiences, our education, our friends, the year we were born, right? The jobs that we have had, and everyone's experiences are valid, and you can always learn, but don't expect someone to just be perfect and agree with you on everything. And yeah, you don't want to disappoint them, but at the same time, it's like I'm not going to agree with them on everything, and they're not going to agree with me on everything. And those are just, frankly, I think that's what makes political discourse stronger, is if you do have points of disagreement, especially with people you are most aligned with.
Hmm. Um, so I think this is my last question about the campaign per se, but what kind of tips, what kind of advice would you offer to people who are running specifically as progressives? Sometimes, in your case, you were the most progressive of the major candidates, right?
Right.
But in what we would refer as marginal districts, and by marginal, I think you could talk about anything from like D+2 to R+10, right? And we're sort of more on the R side in KY6, right? But specifically as a progressive, in running a primary in this sort of marginal district, what kind of advice can you offer candidates who want to run with that kind of profile?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. You can complain all you want about money in politics. You need money to be taken seriously. You need money to win.
Mhm.
Um, it is frustrating that the same people who bemoan money in politics still end up voting for the people who have the most money, because they're like, well, they can get money. And you're like, yeah, but don't you hate money in politics? And they're like, yeah, but. And I'm like, you have to play the rule. You have to play within the system and the rules that are currently governing that system until you become part of that system and can change those rules. So you can be as self-righteous about those rules as you want, but that's not going to change things, right? Like, so make sure that you are taking the money raising seriously.
Mhm.
And listen, if somebody wants to write you a max out check, you take that max out check. Don't say that, well, I'm not taking $3,500. You take that check. it all has to do with how you behave with that check. It doesn't have anything to do with taking it. It has everything to do with what strings you are agreeing to it to come by or to come with, right? I didn't make my donors any promises except for the fact that, like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and these are my policies, right? It wasn't like, oh, and then I'm going to give you this or I'm going to give you that, right? I mean, that was never part of the equation. But I would also say make sure that you are finding as many alliances as possible, right? You get more with honey than you do with vinegar, and so relate to people on a very don't look at it as like some kind of esoteric moral high ground, because progressivism at its heart is trying to make everyday people's lives better and making the system more egalitarian. Focus on that, because the outrage engine, again, does not help. It can drive likes, but likes aren't the same as votes. And so, social media likes don't vote and endorsements don't vote. I also would say do not spend that much time on endorsements. They don't matter unless they do come with a check. So if an endorsement comes with a check or access to a donor network, yeah, okay, do that. But endorsements really don't matter as much. I think like a handful of people said that endorsements mattered to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yeah, as a progressive, stick to your guns. Don't try to win on purity plays, and try to make sure that you are creating alliances where you can, because we will not win and we will not make real positive change just by being outraged all the time. You have to make compromises. And you have to come off as professional too, right? If you look at how I performed on the debates, I pushed progressive policies, but I came off as professional, not just as but blah, 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 I mean, you have to still look and act like a leader that people can envision being in office.
Right, right. I always refer to you as that loud woman. So at the
Thank
debate,
you.
so
That's so kind. That's fine. I've been called loud my whole life, so it's
no,
fine.
I said the same thing at Orange Theory this morning. I think that loud woman is supposed to be next to me. So,
Well, thank you.
um, I want to ask you for a second about, because you just brought it up, right, about vetting, right? Because vetting took on a very substantial role in the main Senate race that all of us are now familiar with, right? And I understand that, like, it was a primary, not a general, right? It was a House seat, not a Senate seat, right? But like, do you have any thoughts about vetting, right? Which is basically sort of, where the National Party or people associated with the National Party, like, say, is this person someone who is deserving of having the Democratic banner? And was there any experience in the campaign where somebody had to say, like, look, we have to vet you for this thing? Or was that something that would have come with the general, or would it never have come outside of like sort of investigative journalism?
Yeah, so no one's so here's the thing, right? So let me tell you how Graham Plattner got to where he is, right? So
Right.
Graham Plattner is the product of, and I will tell you, my biggest problem with politics, and I will put this in the woe category, which is how many, yes, money in politics is a big problem, but the consultants are potentially worse. And so the consultant class in politics is an absolute minefield, because everybody who's worked on a campaign thinks that they're going to be a consultant, and their thoughts matter, and so many people, if you are a first time candidate, number one bit of advice, don't hire any consultants. And if you do want a consultant, get one to do compliance in your fundraising, and that's it. You don't need a general consultant. You don't need a policy consultant. You don't need any of that, because they will just bleed you dry and probably give you bad advice. And a lot of them don't really do anything. They do not work for that money. And so Graham Plattner was chosen by these two progressive consultants, and they said that they went through thousands of people in Maine and they settled on Graham Plattner. And if you watch the interview with them, I can't remember their names. It's a guy and a woman.
Morris Katz, is that one of them?
I think that's correct. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And so they said they had this interview, which was absolutely laughable about the whole vetting process, right? And they said, oh, we went through, like thousands of potential people to like go against, like for this seat. And we paid and they said, what did you vet him? And they were like, ha ha, we paid a firm to do it. And they were like, well, did the firm find the Reddit posts? And they said, yeah, I think it was in there. And they were like, well, did you not care about this really problematic social media stuff? And they were like, ah, whatever. And they were like, did you know about the Nazi tattoo? And they were like, that didn't really come up. Like, this just seems, once again, it's like overconfident kids with laptops being in charge of politics. And it's just so unserious. And so for me personally, no, nobody vetted me, except I did have kind of like a general consultant who I didn't pay. He like did some of my, he did like my commercials and stuff, right? But he was like my person who, I'd bounce things off of, and he's the one who kind of got me into the process. But I mean, he like looked at my background. He was like, yeah, you're legit. And he would like speak to me and he's like, yeah, no, you're a legitimate person. They didn't like go through all my social media or anything, but like, I was in a primary, and I was in it for the right reasons. And I'm a very forthright person. And so they were like, yeah, we don't really see any red flags here. And nobody ever asked me, like, is there anything we need to know about you? And so when the D trip, or when different consultants are looking for someone for kind of like a pet project, they will vet them. The process of that vetting, I don't know what they're doing, because clearly they missed big time on Plattner. And that makes us look stupid.
Right, right. And, a ton of people on social media look pretty stupid about claims they made about, really on either side, but mostly on the one side, right? People look really stupid about the arguments they made about Graham Plattner. So,
well, I tried to stay out of it. I'll be honest with you.
God.
I tried to stay out of the Graham Plattner thing.
I've read enough Stephen King to know that what happens in Maine ought to stay in Maine.
Jacked. Yeah, 1,000%. But I was like, I tried to stay out of it. But there was a podcast, there was a TikTok live I was on towards the end of the campaign, and the host asked me about Graham Plattner, and I said, honestly, I haven't really been paying attention much to what's going on in Maine because I have my own race to run. And a woman, and I said, what I said was, he's a hunky oyster farmer. That's kind of what I know, right? Mm-hmm. She went to my website, got my phone number, which actually rings through to like a Google Voice on my phone, and left me a 45-second voicemail yelling at me, saying, listen, lady, Graham is a good man. He's a hard worker. You need to not talk bad about him. And I'm like, well, what are you doing now, lady? But like, people will do crazy things, like call me randomly and say things like that. But no, I tried to stay out of that one because not my circus, not my monkeys.
So I want to diverge for our last question here. And, honestly, this is off the script. So if you don't want to, but you've done videos about this. Can you help the internet deal with the fact that Mitch McConnell is, currently at some level of incapacitated, because the internet is really struggling with this, right? And I found, especially on Threads, you have a lot of what I think we would call blue anon types, sort of making claims which are, extra legal, absurd, cosmically absurd in certain cases. So could you walk us through where we are, sort of you as a Kentucky politics knower, could you walk us where we are with respect to Senator McConnell's health and Governor Beshear's responsibilities?
Yeah. So here's the funny thing, right? Being in DC and then also just like having friends all over the country and the world, people message me all the time saying, Erin, is McConnell dead or not? And I was like, I don't know. It's like, oh, I don't know the answer to that just because I'm from Kentucky and I'm engaged in politics. Mm-hmm. I do think it's a little absurd that people are saying that picture is AI of him and Elaine Chao. Is it heavily filtered? Yup. When I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, I looked like, as my friend Brett said, you looked like, poo heated over in a less kind way.
I would have said Nosferatu, but
Yeah, honestly, I looked awful. Like I looked dead, right? And I was 34 years old and I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, let
Mhm.
alone an 80-year-old man who is had CPR, which is a horribly traumatic, procedure, life-saving procedure that cracks ribs, it can do all kinds of damage, it can bruise you. And if he was unconscious, there's a lot going on there. But let's talk about this. So there's a lot going on as far as misunderstanding of what the law is in Kentucky. So there are a couple of layers to this. The Kentucky Constitution indicates that in the vacancy of a senator, the governor can appoint someone. Now, the GOP in 2024 made a law that said it has to be the governor can appoint someone, but it has to be from the party that currently occupies that office. And that party will provide three potential nominees and the governor will select them. And then it also, which I think was interesting, it said if it was someone who is an independent, it had to be someone who was not registered with any party, which I thought was funny.
So I just want to pause,
Now,
like
yeah,
constitutional or not, right? And I think that's sort of where you're going. Is I actually think that's a great rule, right? I don't think that
yes,
the balance in the Senate should be at the mercy of whatever 82-year-old is about to die, right?
yeah,
That seems to me to be sort of a really good policy, which is that a vacancy should not change the party balance, but it may be unconstitutional in Kentucky.
well, yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of like so the purpose of the 2024 law, I mean, obviously it was done because Bashir won again, but it was because McConnell was getting older. And the likelihood of him dying in office was more and more and more possible. But yeah, I agree. I do not think that that is all of a sudden like, okay, the people of Kentucky elected a Republican to Senate. Okay. It should not just be because the governor happens to be a Democrat. They should now be able to put a Democrat there. Right. I agree. I'm like, you should respect voters regardless of all the challenges behind it, the money and the power and the whatever. Right. That's outside of that conversation. But in 2025, the law was changed again by the legislature and it said, actually, we're not going to allow for appointment. It has to be a special election. And so, there is this also, by the way, is underpinned by the 17th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which gives states the abilities to determine how to fill vacancies, right? Because it used to be direct appointment of senators. And then the 17th Amendment said that it needs to not be direct appointment of senators, it's election of senators, right? And so where we are right now is that Andy Bashir he was the former attorney general. He is a lawyer. He has a good legal team. He has been known to send things to court and fight things in court and do the kind of, I'm going to do what I want, sue me. Right. So there is a chance that Bashir could be in a position to appoint whoever he wants, right? To that, there's a chance we could go with special elections. And then if the special election happens, some people are saying, oh, it could be Thomas Massey who randomly wins. I mean, there are so many thoughts around this, right?
That's so wishful thinking, right? About
It's
Thomas Massey running for this
also
and then somehow winning, right?
Also, by the way, I am sick and tired of the fetishization, especially by Democrats, of Thomas Massey. I'm like, Thomas Massey is good on like two things, right? Three things that Democrats care about, right? Like it's like Trump. He doesn't like Trump. But he doesn't like Trump because he's not conservative and libertarian enough, right?
Right.
And he doesn't like Israel, but he doesn't like Israel because he is super America first, like Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Right.
right? Has nothing to do with how they're treating Palestine. Nothing. And then three is kind of like on the data center thing, right? Which certain people are in or not.
Right. But
And
but 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 he has a more in accord with MAGA voting record than Andy Barr. Right.
oh,
So
absolutely. Thomas Massey is a Democratic nightmare. The
yeah.
only reason he is useful to Democrats at all right now is because he's against Trump.
Hmm.
But really, he loves Donald Trump. Like he loves him some Donald Trump, but he's critical of him on the Epstein files, right?
Right.
Um, so, anyways, so Democrats, please, God, stop loving Thomas Massey. Like he is not on our side at all. No. But anyway, so going back to this, right, is that the crux of the matter is that do the people of Kentucky deserve to know whether or not their senator is alive and able to do his job? my thought around that is yes, absolutely. If you are in elected office, you need to prove that you are actually capable. Now, his staff has been there for 30 years. So
Mhm.
his staff is really the one who's running things. So really, we shouldn't see much of a difference except for in roll call votes. But then the other piece is, at what point does Bashir need to actually act? The problem is there's no vacancy. There is no vacancy, and he cannot push a vacancy. And frankly, I think that would be executive overreach for him to call a special election. Because that, again, going back to this whole thing, yes, we're doing this because it's Mitch McConnell, but look if Trump did this, right? Or if like Greg Abbott did this in Texas, right? Like forcing a special election just because we don't know if someone's alive or not, right? We cannot allow that kind of executive overreach, just full stop, right? So let's look at the system, because I am someone who is very sensitive to setting precedents, right? And all of these would be executive and judicial precedents. No, you're fine. This would be executive and then likely lead to judicial precedents, and that might not go our way, right? So you'd be very, very careful when you're pushing for things just because it's one specific instance that works for you. So, Mitch
Well, and to sort of, and you may be getting there, right? But people seem to be shocked that there is no 25th Amendment for senators, right? I mean,
yeah,
the only way, Mitch McConnell could be, now, if it were literally brain dead, there are some like things going on. But if the man is capable of sitting up, then he, as far as the U.S. Constitution is concerned, he's capable of being a senator.
that is correct, because there is no requirement to even be literate to be a
Right.
senator, right? There are no requirements except for the fact that you need to be a U.S. citizen and live in your district by the time of your when you assume the office, right? Like there, and you have to be what, like 35?
30, 30.
No, 30. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
president is 35, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
32? Yeah, 35, yeah. Yeah, 30 years old, right? The requirements are slim at best, right?
Mhm.
So, there's all these shoulds, but then there's the what is the law? And you have to go by what is the law, regardless of what you think. And so, some people are saying that Andy Bashir needs to be harder on Mitch McConnell on this. Because of his presidential bid, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of people thinking that right now, Andy Bashir is really hurting his presidential hopefulness, which I have a lot of thoughts on. But that because he's not being harder on this, and we need someone who's going to be harder on Republicans and just assuming the establishment ways are the ways that we need to keep going. But honestly, there's really nothing Bashir can really do. I know I've been reached out to by some groups and said, hey, can you connect us with Bashir's office? Because we have some constitutional lawyers who would like to talk to him. And I was like, I'm not getting involved in this. Like, this is not my thing. If you want to
The
connect.
man is an attorney. He understands the Constitution of both
And he is
Kentucky
an
and the United
attorney.
States.
He understands the Constitution. He's sued the state. He's sued people before. Like, he doesn't need other people doing that. Like, he gets it, and he's making very calculated decisions. Like, you can say anything you want to about Andy Bashir, but Andy Bashir is a very smart man. He is a very savvy politician, and he is making his choices very carefully, especially on this matter.
Right. And so my feeling on this is that he has staked out a position that allows him to say that he's a fighter, but that does not require him to do anything, which is actually sort of ideal from his perspective as governor of Kentucky at the moment, because he can't actually do anything about anything, right? But his position, as far as I understand it, is that he still has the right to nominate anybody he goddamn pleases to this seat if it comes open, right? Now, we know in reality that if he nominated Charles Brooker or any other Democrat, they would never be seated by the U.S. Senate. And so it's complete, like nothing would happen, right? The vulnerability here, right, is that having staked out the position that he has the right to make this nomination, if Senator McConnell resigns or passes away before November, and I want to be very firm here, Mitch McConnell is still alive, right? The man is alive. He's not dead. We would
He
know
has
if he
a
were dead.
heartbeat. I think he has a heartbeat. To what degree? I don't know.
I
Yeah.
mean, is it a total eclipse of the heart that we're looking for?
Listen, I'm just going to say that, I mean, well, first you kind of have to have a heart to have a heartbeat, but lol. But no, I mean, here's the thing, right? Is that like when it comes to, and this kind of, I'm going to zoom out on this one a little bit, but I am lamenting the essential death of investigative journalism right now because some spry gumshoe would have already like gotten into the hospital somewhere and taken a picture and like, or like been like, hey, we, got on deep background that he's here, or like
Mhm.
something, but with the consolidation of mainstream media and like this rise of like independent journalists who have zero training in journalistic ethics or
Mhm.
journalism in general and like actually vetting your sources, like, you can say whatever you want about Aaron Parnas, but he's not the Washington Post, right? Like
Right.
or what the Washington Post used to be.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I guess to close out, my question is: I know that you have started, especially in data center activism.
Yeah.
I know you're a strong supporter of candidate Dembo, of Zach, of Charles Booker, right in
Charles
Kentucky.
Booker, yeah, he's
Yeah.
Charles Booker. I know that it's going to be a tough one for him, right? It's like,
Well, I wish that all of the energy that people would spend on yelling at Andy Bashir for not just appointing somebody to the seat would could flow into support for Charles Booker, right?
yeah. And I will tell you, that's the thing is like this outrage machine is unproductive, right? Why
Right,
are we yelling at people when you could be channeling that into actually getting better people elected? And that's how we actually get things done.
right, right. But for you, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, listen, from the beginning of this, I always said that my big thing is I want to try to revitalize and reinvigorate the Democratic Party. And that is going to be the underlying ethos of everything I'm trying to do. The data center stuff, I am pushing very hard for it to be regulated. I did come from the data center industry before I got into the race. I did global sustainability at Amazon Web Services. I was in Frankfurt 2 weeks ago lobbying for certain types of regulation. I've been doing a lot of organizing around it. I'm seen as an expert in that industry here locally, and I just won a grant, so I will have a grant project that I'm working on to create like a toolkit and an organizational mapping structure of everyone who's involved in the data center ecosystem to make it easier for counties to actually respond to potential data center developments, whether they want them, whether they don't want them, whether they want a strong ordinance, option, whether they want a moratorium option. Um, Whether they don't want a hyperscale, whether they want edge, all of those things. But as far as that's all unpaid work, really. So my other thing is I'm looking for a job, so I'm trying to be very intentional with what I do next professionally.
Mhm.
I have the luxury of the fact that I do have some savings. I'm going to the UK for a month to start working on my book, but then I do want to come back to Kentucky and do something that is focused on energy, on sustainability, because climate is something that's incredibly important to me. So whether that's something that will be a remote position that travels outside of the state, or whether it's something dedicated here in the state, that remains to be seen. But I do want to continue my work in the climate, sustainability, and energy space while also kind of keeping the plate spinning on the data center regulation and revitalizing and reinvigorating the Democratic Party so that we are not just absolutely walloped in every single election up and down the ballot moving forward.
All right, Aaron. Well, that was a great way to close this podcast. I want to thank you for joining us here today, on your umpteenth LGM podcast. You have not set the record. There are a couple of people who are ahead of you, but
Do I get a cool jacket like they do, like for SNL
well,
hosts?
you're not a five timer yet. So and no,
Am I not?
so no,
Is
you're.
this my fourth?
I want to say this might be three. Is
No,
it?
because remember I did one way back when. This was like I think it was like 2019 or something when we first had the bourbon tariffs.
I'll have to go back and look, right?
Or was it a Patterson
Our
podcast?
records, yeah, I think that was a Patterson podcast. So you're 3 or 4 right now. We'll
Okay.
work on the whole 5-time jacket situation thingy. So,
Okay.
anyway, Aaron, I want to thank you, and I think this has been enormously productive for, especially people like you who are considering really running for election in
Yeah,
places where Democrats should be considering running for election, right?
absolutely.
And it's appalling that there are so many districts across the country where there are basically no Democrats running in the
Yeah,
House, right?
absolutely.
So go ahead.
And I just want to do a last. I just want to shout out my buddy Larry out in Lancaster. He's a huge fan, and I won him over because I have been on this podcast and you posted about me. So yes, LGM has swayed some Kentucky voters in my favor, and so for that I thank you. And Larry, this is your LGM shout out,
LGM is kingmaker for Larry, at least. So
or at least Larry. Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you again for listening to the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. We would like to thank Elizabeth Nelson of the Paranoid Style for supplying as our intro and outro music I'd Bet My Lands and Titles, a track on the album For Executive Meeting. If you would like to support the Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast or any other aspect of the Lawyers, Guns, and Money project, please visit us at www.patreon.com/lawyersgunsandmoney or donate at the PayPal link on the website. Thank you.